It's a new year and a new chance for you to make a fresh start with your compliance. For the next 31 days on the FCPA Compliance Report, we're going to be bringing you a daily tip, strategy, or idea that you can use to improve your program. Here's your host, Tom Fox, the Compliance Evangelist.
In an article entitled Advancing Board Refreshment Through the Director Succession Planning Process, William Libet and Todd Freer listed a 6-step process that a board should utilize for or to facilitate director succession planning. This is an area that I don't think gets enough play in the discussion of the obligations of a board, but certainly in the realm of compliance, it's important that the board be ready to replace a chief compliance officer or a board be ready to facilitate the elevation to an employee to senior executive status and or engage in adding new personnel to the board. So as an initial step number one, the board should examine corporate governance documents to see what policies and procedures currently exist, either in the form of corporate governance guidelines, corporate charters, or director nomination policies, and then utilize those as the basis moving forward. Step number two, use an assessment framework. Director succession is generally most effective when reviewed and planned in an assessment framework on a regular basis. Such frameworks can include assessing the current strengths and weaknesses of the board and each board member, each board committee. It can be identifying the long and short-term skill needs of the board, particularly in light of the overall compliance strategy, evolving compliance risks, and shareholder issues. It can involve evaluating the board's assessment changes when retiring directors are factored into the analysis. What's the age of your board members? Are you going to simply renominate another set of board members going forward? And 4, shifting the board's approach of automatically renominating existing directors to one that bases a director's renomination on a number of board criteria, such as the evolving compliance needs and directors' performance regarding compliance. So there are a number of questions that the board needs to engage in for essentially self-assessment, but to be ready to bring to bear the appropriate skills for boards going forward, either through new blood coming in or on the renomination process. Number 3, conduct due diligence. Obviously, we talked about a executive level due diligence and why that is important in yesterday's podcast. But today I'd like to focus on that for executive level due diligence for a director candidate. So whether a director comes through an internal recommendation, formal third-party recruiters, other sources such as the NACD, or some combination, the board needs to engage in its own independent board-level due diligence for evaluating the characteristics, credentials, independence, and potential related third-party transactions or conflicts of interest of any potential board member. At a minimum, you should look at professional employment, directorships, civic and charitable involvement awards, education, professional certifications, personal attributes, social media, postings, writings, books, speeches, all of those things that we talked about yesterday. And you should engage a top-notch firm that focuses on executive and board level due diligence. Number 4, maintaining a pipeline. After conducting director qualification assessments and the appropriate due diligence, a board should maintain a pipeline of qualified candidates, and this can help ameliorate any significant changes in board employment for health concerns or other unexpected personal or professional reasons. Having qualified candidates already identified will greatly assist the effectiveness and efficiency of the board succession process. Number 4, assess board policies. As part of your director succession planning, a board should annually assess its own leadership, committee structure, rotation, and mandatory retirement policies. Not the individuals, but the policies themselves. Hopefully your company has a corporate policy management oversight, but the board needs to do this at its level. This is typically delegated to the corporate compliance committee of the board, but I might suggest that this would be an appropriate task for the compliance committee because A compliance committee should have expertise around policies and procedures and can bring that to bear. Number 5, disclosure strategy. Certain institutional investors and corporate governance advocates encourage companies to disclose their succession strategies. This can help you both in terms of the communications with your stakeholders, including shareholders, employees, and others, but also be a good defense in addition to a shield if you're put in any type of shareholder litigation or if the government comes knocking. Articulating, communicating your strategy will give a clear metric by which you can be measured and held accountable going forward. And finally, benchmark your strategy. Boards should regularly benchmark their director succession and board refreshment strategy with not only peers in the industry, but those in the industry, and if you're a global company, other global companies. You don't want to be an outlier, but if you're in the middle of the road, I think that would be where you would need to be. Obviously, you need to stay abreast of evolving policies and positions of large institutional investors, shareholders, and government advocates. CalPERS leads the way on this, but others such as State Street advisors talk about the obligations of boards going forward, and you want to be really ahead of all of that. What are today's 3 key takeaways? Number 1, refreshment is a hot topic in corporate governance. This could be board refreshment, but here I'd like you to focus on refreshment in the CCO role. How are you going to do it? How are you going to hire? But more importantly, how are you going to engage in succession planning? Number 2, review your board policies to understand what your company needs going forward. Just as policies and procedures must be reviewed from the compliance perspective, they need to be reviewed from the board perspective. And number 3, transparency and succession planning. Obliqueness is the problem that many companies face because no one knows what the process is. So transparency is a critical element. Thank you for listening to this episode of 31 Days to a More Effective Compliance Program, where we're going to take a look at the role of the board of directors in a best practices compliance program. This production of 31 Days to a More Effective Compliance Program is a special production of the Compliance Podcast Network. I hope you will join me again tomorrow.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.